The Alaska Highway was not born from peace. It was carved from wilderness during World War II after Pearl Harbor, when the United States and Canada faced a shared threat. A land route to Alaska became critical to move troops and supplies. This urgent need forged an unprecedented partnership between two nations. They agreed to build a road, over 1,500 miles through some of the world's harshest terrain. More than 10,000 American soldiers and thousands of Canadian civilians worked side by side, battling frozen ground, dense forests, and relentless mosquitoes. In less than 9 months, the project was complete, a miracle of engineering and a symbol of wartime unity. The highway stood as proof that, when faced with a common enemy, the United States and Canada could achieve the impossible together. After the war, the highway opened to the public, becoming a legendary route for adventurers and a lifeline for remote communities. For generations, the journey along the Alaska Highway was a rite of passage, representing freedom and the seamless bond between two close allies. The border crossing was often a simple formality, a friendly wave between neighbors. The road itself felt like shared ground, a testament to trust and mutual respect. But by August 2025, that long-held symbolism began to crumble. The road that once united two nations was about to drive them apart. The spirit of cooperation was replaced by suspicion and political tension. The Alaska Highway was about to become a geopolitical fault line. In the summer of 2025, Canada announced strict new regulations for all traffic on the Alaska Highway. Substantial tolls for commercial vehicles turned a free passage into a costly one. Intensive inspection checkpoints created long delays and logistical nightmares. Canada justified these measures on national security, environmental protection, and indigenous rights. The government argued that unchecked traffic posed security risks and environmental damage, and that tolls would fund repairs and oversight. The timing was no accident. This was a direct response to escalating trade tensions with the United States. By targeting Alaska's supply line, Canada signaled it would not accept economic pressure passively. The move was strategic, using geography as leverage in a high-stakes economic dispute. Ottawa also emphasized its commitment to First Nations communities, promising a share of toll revenue and addressing long-standing grievances. The new rules were framed as both a political maneuver and a step toward reconciliation. Canada was asserting control over its territory and protecting its interests. The Alaska Highway was no longer just a road, it was a bargaining chip. The United States reacted with outrage. President Trump condemned Canada's regulations, calling them an attack on American sovereignty and accusing Canada of holding Alaska hostage. The White House's fiery rhetoric escalated the dispute into an international crisis, closing the border to Canadian tourists and imposing new tariffs. Diplomatic channels were bypassed in favor of public condemnation, making compromise difficult. Meanwhile, Alaskan leaders felt the pressure. They understood their state's vulnerability and urged the White House to pursue serious diplomacy. Alaska's economy and daily life depended on the highway, and a prolonged standoff would be devastating. Alaskan politicians tried to mediate, supporting the president's stance publicly while privately seeking de-escalation. The disconnect between political theater in Washington and real-world consequences in Alaska grew. Alaskan leaders became mediators, explaining their unique situation to a federal government focused on political victory. Their calls for calm contrasted sharply with the escalating conflict. The crisis was no longer just about policy, it was about survival. The effects of Canada's new regulations hit Alaska immediately. The state's economy, reliant on the highway, began to seize up. Tolls and inspection delays created bottlenecks, driving up costs and causing shortages. Groceries, fuel, and basic goods became scarce and expensive. Pharmacies faced delays in critical medications. Construction projects stalled. The once reliable supply chain was broken. The crisis exposed Alaska's dependence on a single, vulnerable land route. Tourism suffered as travelers canceled trips, devastating small businesses along the highway. The sense of isolation deepened. Alaska felt cut off by a political wall. For Alaskans, this was not an abstract debate but a daily struggle. Families made hard choices, business owners feared closure, the security and predictability of life in Alaska vanished. The highway, once a lifeline, now felt like a tightening noose. Frustration mounted, at Ottawa for the rules and at Washington for inflaming the crisis. The people of Alaska were caught in the crossfire. Canada's legal position was unassailable. Many Americans believed the U.S. had a guaranteed right to use the Alaska Highway, but no such treaty exists. The road was built under a temporary wartime arrangement. After the war, control reverted fully to Canada. For decades, easy passage was based on goodwill, not legal obligation. This gave Ottawa significant leverage in 2025. Imposing tolls and inspections was well within Canada's rights as a sovereign nation. The U.S. had no legal grounds to demand access. Canadian officials pointed out that the U.S. would never allow another country to dictate its own highways. The lack of a treaty became the central fact of the crisis. America's access to Alaska depended entirely on Canadian cooperation. Canada was setting the terms. The U.S. could only ask for concessions. The standoff fueled nationalism in both countries. In the U.S., Trump's rhetoric resonated. Rallies, boycotts, and the #FreeAlaska surged. The legal nuances were lost in a narrative of American strength versus foreign obstruction. Diplomats struggled. Any compromise was seen as weakness. In Canada, resentment grew against American bullying. Canadians rallied behind their government's firm stance, seeing the crisis as a point of national pride. Editorials praised Ottawa for standing up to U.S. pressure. Both governments faced domestic pressure to hold their ground. Nationalism on both sides hardened positions, creating a feedback loop that pushed the Allies further apart. The diplomatic off-ramp was disappearing. After weeks of tension and economic pain, negotiators reached a temporary agreement. The deal was a compromise. Canada suspended tolls and inspections. The U.S. suspended proposed tariffs. Most significantly, the U.S. formally acknowledged Canada's sovereignty over its portion of the highway. Relief swept through Alaska as trucks moved freely and shelves refilled. The crisis was averted, but the agreement was temporary, a truce, not a solution. The core issues, trade, environmental standards, indigenous rights, remained unresolved. The deal highlighted the trade-offs of diplomacy. The U.S. got the road reopened but had to accept Canada's legal authority. Canada defended its sovereignty but paused its new regulations. Both sides stepped back from the brink, but neither got everything it wanted. The agreement managed the problem, not solved it. The clock was ticking on a permanent solution. The Alaska Highway's future was still uncertain. The fragile calm could break at any moment. The temporary deal reopened the highway, but trust was shattered. Americans felt vulnerable and resentful. Canadians felt bullied and determined to defend their interests. The goodwill built over generations was spent. Future relations would be colored by suspicion. Most critically, the concerns of Indigenous First Nations were left unresolved. Their demands for environmental protection and economic benefits were sidelined in the rush to end the crisis. The foundation of the highway's future remained unstable. Indigenous grievances were not going away. Any permanent agreement would be incomplete without their participation. The truce quieted the nations, but the original inhabitants were still waiting to be heard. The Alaska Highway crisis of 2025 is a sobering lesson about alliances in a changing world. Even the closest friendships can fracture under pressure. Historical goodwill is no guarantee of future cooperation. The dispute showed the need for clear, binding agreements, not just handshakes. Nationalist rhetoric turned a policy dispute into a crisis. The path forward requires quiet diplomacy and mutual respect. The future of the U.S. Canada relationship depends on rediscovering the spirit of partnership and including Indigenous voices. The Alaska Highway's journey from unity to division will shape North American diplomacy for years to come.